أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين بارئ الخلائق أجمعين باعث الأنبياء والمرسلين، ثم الصلاة والسلام على خير خلقه العبد المؤيد والرسول المسدد حبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين وصحابته المنتجبين. قال الله تعالى في كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إنا نحن نزلنا الذكر وإنا له لحافظون. صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. We all know that the current Old Testament and New Testament are not the original versions that were descended upon Prophet Musa and Prophet Isa. The Torah that exists today, also known as the Old Testament, and the Injil that exists today, also known as the New Testament, it's definitely not the same exact, they're not the same exact books that were revealed to Musa and Isa. Have they completely changed? No. We can't say that everything has been distorted. However, there is a great deal in these two books that has been distorted. This is not just Muslims who believe in this. It's not just an accusation by Muslims towards the Old Testament and the New Testament. They themselves, Christians themselves, and biblical scholars admit that the current Bible is not the same Bible that was revealed. Proof of that is the many different versions. You have lots of versions of the Bible. You have the King James Version, you have the Book of Barnabas, you have so many versions. And it's not just a matter of translation, that each Bible was translated differently. No, it's not a matter of translation. Even some of the words are different. For example, the New Testament has approximately 24,000 manuscripts. 24,000 manuscripts. Different manuscripts. That means there's different readings. 24,000 different readings to the Bible. Yes, some of the differences are very minimal, and other differences could be big. For example, in the book of Genesis, which is the first book in the Old Testament, correct? The book of Genesis, the very first chapter, there's one manuscript that says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. This is one manuscript. And another, it says, in the beginning, God created the earth and the heavens. There's a switch. Correct? You might say, what's the big deal? In the first one, he says, God created the heavens and the earth. And in the second one, he says, God created the earth and the heavens. Correct? It's not a big deal. But look at the third. The third one says, in the beginning, a third manuscript for the Old Testament says, in the beginning, Jesus created the heavens and the earth. You see? The word God is not there. There's the word Jesus. So which one's correct? Is it the first manuscript or the second or the third? Of course, we know that which one's correct. Which word is correct? God, not Jesus. But for them, there's different manuscripts. In another manuscript, it says, in the beginning, God created the sky and the earth. Not the heavens. The sky and the earth. You see, there's various manuscripts. And they themselves admit to this, that the Old Testament today, they're not 100% positive that it's the Old Testament or the New Testament that was revealed to Musa and Isa. And biblical scholars, they have a way of studying which is the oldest and which is the most accurate script. They call this textual criticism. It's a process of finding the original text because there's so many texts, because there's so many manuscripts, they provided a process called textual criticism in order to decipher which is the oldest and most original text. They admit that the Bible today is not the same exact Bible, the old Bible. There's a scholar by the name of Keith Gifford from the International Baptist College. I'm quoting him. He says, it is a commonly recognized fact that 80 to 85% of manuscript evidence is in total agreement. He's saying up to 85% of manuscript content is in agreement. So what's not in agreement is 15%. At the end of the day, is there a difference or is there no difference? Up to 15% of the biblical manuscripts disagree. That means they can't be sure that this is the exact Bible. And then he goes on to say that some of these variants do affect the theology of those particular verses. Depending on which verses that you read, you'll come up with a different theology. And then he says, but our doctrine is not affected since there are so many other verses which teach the doctrine in question. So if you can question this verse in the Bible, but there's another verse which can prove your doctrine. At the end of the day, is he admitting or is he not admitting that the versions and the copies of the Bible today, we're not 100% sure that it's the original Bible? Now this is not my point of discussion tonight, my dear friends. My point is not regarding the Old Testament or the New Testament, but my point of discussion tonight is regarding the Quran. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. The Quran that we have today, and we read today, and we practice and implement and memorize, is it the same Quran that was revealed to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or is it different? That the same thing that happened to the Torah and Injil, and they were distorted, tahrif, did the same thing occur with the Quran, or the Quran that we have today? It's the same exact Quran that was revealed to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and was read by him and read by the Sahaba and read by the holy Imams. What is the answer? First of all, when we say distortions, when we ask, are there distortions in the Quran? What do we mean by distortions? Tahrif. What do we mean by tahrif? There's three possible meanings. One meaning of tahrif and distortion is that there are verses that were added to the Quran. There were people, individuals, that added verses to the Quran. This is one possibility. Another possibility, the first possibility is additions. The second possibility is deletions. That there were some individuals and people that deleted certain verses. This is also a form of distortion. A third possibility is called tashif. Tashif is changing a word. Changing a word. You replace a word. You take out one word, you put in another word. These are three possible meanings to tahrif, to distortions of the Quran. Additions, deletions, and changing of words. When we come to additions, both schools of thought, the Sunni school of thought and the Shia school of thought, all agree that there is absolutely no additions to the Quran. No one has added anything to the Quran, not even a single dot. All schools of thought agree. However, when it comes to deletions, there is a very, 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 very small minority in the school of thought of Ahlul Bayt that believe there could be some deletions. And there is a very, 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 very small minority in the Sunni school of thought that also believe in this. That there could be deletions. However, this is a very small view, a very unorthodox view. The general view is that the Quran has not been tampered with. The Quran that we have today is the same exact Quran that was revealed upon Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Ironically, our Sunni brothers and sisters accuse us, the followers of Ahlul Bayt, of believing in distortions. That the Quran has been distorted. And there are some of us that accuse our Sunni brothers and sisters of believing in distortions. You see, from both schools of thought, there's accusations of distortions. And that is the biggest proof that there are no distortions. Because we're both running away from this belief. We're accusing them, they're accusing us of distortions. At the end of the day, there are no distortions, as we shall see. Of course, believing that the Quran has been distorted is extremely dangerous. Why? Because the Quran becomes just like the Bible. It becomes just like the Torah or the Injil. If it's distorted, it becomes meaningless. That means this is not the original text that was revealed from Allah to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It loses its meaning. How can I build up my theology upon a Quran that's been tampered with? How can I build my fiqh system and derive laws from a text that has been tampered with? You see the danger of this sort of accusation, of this sort of theory, that the Quran has been tampered with and there are distortions in the Quran? Now, we'd like to concentrate on the Shia school of thought and our narrations, because we do have some narrations, and I won't lie, we'll say this, we do have some narrations in our traditions that allude to the thought of the Quran being tampered with. And there are deletions, that some verses were deleted from the Quran. We do have some narrations. Tonight, I'd like to concentrate on this topic to see what our traditions say, what our sources say, and how we can provide an answer and refute this theory. What do our brothers and sisters say from the Sunni school of thought, and what about their narrations and their traditions? I don't have time to tackle this tonight, but I've seen other speakers from my brothers and colleagues from the English minbar that have tackled this issue. For those that wish to listen to them, go ahead. Tonight I'd like to tackle our sources, our books, and what they say about tahrif and distortions. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. We have some narrations that say that everything that took place with the Jews and the Christians will happen with the Muslims as well. Everything that occurred in Judaism and Christianity will occur in Islam. Muslims will follow the footsteps of Christians and Jews. Having said that, Christians and Jews distorted their own books. They deleted, they added to their books. That means that Islam, the same thing happened in Islam. And Muslims did the same exact thing. A hadith by Imam Sadiq alayhi salam. He says, قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم كل ما كان في الأمم السالفة فإنه يكون في هذه الأمة مثل حذو النعل بالنعل. That whatever happened in the previous nations will happen in this nation. The Imam says this. What do we gather? That if in previous nations they distorted their books, that means we'll distort our books. First of all, the answer, number one, not when Rasulullah says that we will follow their footsteps. Not everything. This is not to be taken literally. That everything that will happen in those nations, it will happen in our nation. For example, Bani Israel were lost in the desert for 40 years. This didn't happen to us. They worshipped a golden calf. We didn't do this. Thus, there are distinctions. We can't say that everything that they did, we will do. This is one. Number two, it's enough we did follow their footsteps and that we abandoned our books. The same way that they abandoned their books and they didn't practice and implement their books, some Muslims are doing the same. Can you safely say that all Muslims implement the Quran and practice the Quran? No. The same way that Christians and Jews abandoned their books, we abandoned our books as well. We're not practicing everything in the Quran. We're not implementing everything in the Quran. Thus, this is the first argument. This is the first argument, and that's its answer. The second argument, found in our books, and this is very detailed, and this is very important, that after the death of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi, Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam came out with his own copy of the Quran. He came out and he told the Sahaba that I have the Quran. I have it. I've gathered it. I've compiled the Quran. They told him, Ya Ali, we don't need your copy. We don't need your book. We already have the compilation of the Quran. Thus, for example, this hadith is narrated by Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam in the book Al-Ihtijaj. He says, أتى بالكتاب كاملا على التأويل والتنزيل والمحكم والمتشابه والناسخ والمنسوخ لم يسقط منه حرف ألف ولا لام فلم يقبلوا ذلك. Amir al-Mu'mineen came out with the book, his Quran, and he told them that I've gathered everything in this book, yet they rejected and they told him, we don't want your book. Some say, see, the original Quran is with Ali ibn Abi Talib. The Quran that the Sahaba had, it was distorted. It was not the original Quran. The original Quran lies with Ali ibn Abi Talib. And they call it Mushafu Aliyin. The answer. Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, it is true, he compiled the Quran. But his Quran had additions. What do I mean by additions? His Quran had tafsir as well. It wasn't just a copy of the Quran. It had tafsir. It had the explanation of the Quran. It had the exegesis of the Quran. Amir al-Mu'mineen's Quran contained knowledge that the other copies didn't have. The abrogated verses, the general verses. It had special knowledge that the other copies were empty of. Thus, Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam wanted to give them the book with its explanation, with its tafsir. They didn't want the tafsir. Of course, here we have to point something out, something very important. Amir al-Mu'mineen, his book was full of revelations. Everything in it was revelations. You might say then, if it was revelations, then that means that's the Quran. His Quran had more than the Quran that we have today. The Quran that the Sahaba had didn't have the revelations that were inside the Quran of Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam. That means it's not the same Quran. No. Why? Because revelations are of two kinds. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would reveal to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, his revelation was of two kinds. The first revelation was the Quran itself. He would reveal the Quran. The second form of revelation was the meaning to the Quran. Not everything that Allah spoke to Rasulullah was Quran. Some of it was Quran, some of it was just explanation to the Quran, giving him commands that was not necessarily the Quran. You see? So if we have narrations that say Allah revealed so and so to Rasulullah, it doesn't mean that this has to be the Quran. It could be the tafsir to the Quran, an explanation to the Quran. And that's what Amir al-Mu'mineen had in his book. His book was the Quran plus more. It had the tafsir of the Quran, the explanation of the Quran. And that's what the Sahaba rejected. They did not want the tafsir. They did not want the explanation to the Quran. Why? Because obviously some verses spoke about the Ahl al-Bayt. They did not want people to know the meanings of these verses. They wanted these verses to remain ambiguous and vague, for people not to know who is the verse speaking about, for example. Thus, Amir al-Mu'mineen's copy of the Quran is the same exact book that we have in our homes and in our centers. Nothing different whatsoever. Sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. The third argument that some try to prove that the Quran is distorted, they say that the Quran was compiled and gathered after the death of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. By whom? By Uthman. Uthman is the one that gathered the Quran. And how did he gather the Quran? Uthman gathered all the Muslims. And he told them, whoever has verses of the Quran, come to me and bring me what you have. For example, you're at a university and the college professor speaks for 2 hours, and everyone's writing down notes. But that college professor speaks, he speaks fast, he speaks quickly. So everyone's writing notes, but not everyone has the same exact notes. Maybe some have notes that others don't have. And you want to gather all the notes. So what do is you tell all your friends, give me all of your notes so that I can gather what this professor said. So supposedly, Uthman ibn Affan gathered all the Muslims and told them, what verses do you have? You have 2 verses? Bring them over. You have 5 verses? Bring them over. 10, 20, 50, whatever verses you have, bring them over, let me gather the Quran. Now, when they brought him the verses, he needed, for each verse, he wanted 2 witnesses. For example, someone comes and tells him that there's a verse in the Quran that says, قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ. He says, do you have witnesses? The man says, yes, I have 2 witnesses. Just 2. This is what some say. He just had 2 witnesses. If he had 2 witnesses that come and testify that قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ is part of the Quran, then he would write it inside the Quran. And then another verse with two witnesses, and so on and so forth. So the argument is that if Uthman compiled the Quran, and he depended on 2 witnesses for each verse, how can he be sure that there's no distortions? There must have been distortions, because there's over 6,666 or something like that verses. For each verse you need 2 witnesses only, just 2 witnesses. But 2 witnesses can come and fabricate verses, can distort, and it becomes part of the Quran. It's that simple, it's that easy. Right? Wrong. Why? Because we believe that the Quran was not gathered and compiled by Uthman. I repeat, the Quran was not gathered by Uthman. The Quran was gathered by none other than Amir al-Mu'mineen, but the order of whom? Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The Quran was gathered during the life of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Rasulullah did not die before the compilation of the Quran. Why? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Al-yawm akmaltu lakum dinakum. Today I've completed your religion and faith. What sort of completion would this be if Rasulullah would die and the Quran is still not compiled? The Quran is still not gathered. The Quran is still not a book. That's impossible. Thus, we believe, and this is the opinion of Ayatollah Sayyid al-Khoi, that the Quran was gathered during the time of Rasulullah. And it was Amir al-Mu'mineen who gathered it, and the supervisor was Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The Quran was gathered. It was all gathered. It was not gathered by Uthman. This is the 3rd argument. The 4th argument is that there are some verses in the Quran that have absolutely no relevance. In the same verse, sections of the same exact verse. The beginning of the verse is talking about one thing. The ending of the verse is talking about something else. They say, isn't this proof that the Quran is distorted? How can one verse talk about 3 or 4 different subjects? That's impossible. This means that the Quran was distorted. For example, we have a verse that says, فَإِنْ خِفْتُمْ أَلَّا تُقْسِطُوا فِي الْيَتَامَى فَانْكِحُوا مَا طَابَ لَكُم مِّنَ النِّسَاءِ مَثْنًى وَثُلَاثَ وَرُبَاعَ. If you fear that you cannot be fair and just with the orphans, then marry 2 or 3 or 4 wives. What does the beginning of the verse have to do with the ending of the verse? If you fear that you cannot be just with the orphans, so marry 2 or 3 or 4 wives? What relevance does that have? And another verse, أَوْفُوا بِالْعُقُودِ وَأُحِلَّتْ لَكُمْ بَهِيمَةُ الْأَنْعَامِ. Follow transactions. If you have a transaction, then carry it. Don't break that transaction. أُحِلَّتْ لَكُمْ بَهِيمَةُ الْأَنْعَامِ. You may eat certain animals. What does that have to do with it? The beginning of the verse is talking about transactions. The ending of the verse is talking about meat and animals. 3rd, the verse that addresses the holy household. إِنَّمَا يُرِيدُ اللَّهُ لِيُذْهِبَ عَنْكُمُ الرِّجْسَ أَهْلَ الْبَيْتِ وَيُطَهِّرَكُمْ تطهيرا. The verses before it are addressing whom? Whom? The wives. After it, it's addressing whom? The wives. All of a sudden, this verse is right in the middle. Before and after, it's all addressing the wives of Rasulullah, but this verse is addressing the Ahlul Bayt. How is this possible? Or the verse that says, اليوم أكملت لكم دينكم وأتممت نعم اليوم أكملت لكم دينكم وأتممت عليكم نعمتي ورضيت لكم الإسلام دينا. Before it, the verse starts, حرمت عليكم الميتة والدم ولحم الخنزير. The verse is talking about the kind of food that is haram on us, for us, and the food that is halal upon us. And then Allah comes and says, اليوم أكملت لكم دينكم, I have completed your religion. And then He goes back talking about food. Some say, what relevance is this? These verses are not connected. This is proof that they are distorted. Okay? The answer. Number one, you see, my friends, the Quran, when it speaks, the Quran uses its style is speech style. It's not book style. This is very important. What do I mean by this? Book style is that every chapter is connected. This chapter, for example, when an author writes a book, the first chapter is all about one subject. The second chapter is about one subject. The third chapter is about another subject. Correct? But speech style, in speeches, not everything is connected. A speaker can talk about 10 different subjects in one lecture. Correct or no? Correct? One speaker can talk about he could talk about salah, and then all of a sudden he's talking about hajj, and then he's talking about hijab, and then he's talking about selfies on Facebook, and then he's talking about I don't know what, and then he's talking about iftar. He's all over the place. This is very much possible. Why? Because this is speech style, it's not book style. Now the Quran, which style is it? Is it book style or speech style? Speech style. Because every verse is speaking about one thing. That is why scholars say, لغة القرآن لغة خطاب وليس لغة كتاب. That the Quran is speech style, it's not book style. So it's normal for one verse to address various topics. That's something very, very normal. صلوا على محمد وعلى محمد. We have narrations that are either explicitly or implicitly state that the Quran has been distorted. These narrations are in various categories. For example, one category explicitly states that the Quran has been distorted. For example, one hadith says, إنه يضل الناس عن سبيل الله ويحرف كتابه. His book will be distorted. In another verse, اؤتمنوا على كتاب الله فحرفوه وبدلوه. They were trusted with the book of Allah, yet they fabricated and they distorted it. So these narrations are telling us that the Quran has been distorted. That the Quran has been fabricated. Some verses have been fabricated. Correct? No. These verses, these narrations, these traditions are not telling us that the words of the verses have been distorted, but rather their meanings. The meanings of the verses have been distorted. The meanings of the Quran has been distorted. Yes. For example, one verse, نعم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تقربوا الصلاة وأنتم سكارى. Some scholars, obviously not from the school of thought of Ahlul Bayt, they say that this verse that says, "O you who believe, do not come close to salah while you're drunk." For example, Sayyid Qutb, in his tafsir, he says that this verse was revealed because of Ali ibn Abi Talib. Because he prayed while he was drunk. So Allah revealed this verse. You see, he doesn't distort the verse, but he distorts its meaning. This is what they did. They distorted the meanings. Or the verse, إنما يريد الله ليذهب عنكم رجس أهل البيت. They said that this verse was revealed regarding the wives of Rasulullah. This is not distortion of the words of the Quran. This is distortion of its meanings. This is one group of narrations. Another group that say that there are words pertaining, there are verses pertaining to the Ahl al-Bayt that were deleted by their enemies. That were deleted. We have narrations. We have such narrations. For example, one narration by Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam. And by the way, there's a lecture on YouTube of my father, Hossein al Qazwini, mentioning a narration. Maybe some of you have heard it. He mentions a narration, one of these narrations, he's only mentioning the narration, and it's posed in a way that people think my father believes in tahrif and distortions. And I've received maybe 20 or 30 messages that, does your father believe in distortions? I tell him no, he doesn't. But he mentioned one of the following narrations. Now I hope the same thing doesn't happen to me. People come and cut and paste and they say that so-and-so believes in distortions. A hadith by Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam. He says, نزل جبرائيل بهذه الآية على محمد هكذا كنتم وإن كنتم في ريب مما نزلنا على عبدنا في علي فأتوا بسورة مثله. Imam al-Baqir says that this is how the verse was revealed. It had the name of Ali ibn Abi Talib. In another verse, in another hadith by Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, he says that the following verse, this is how it was revealed. إن الله اصطفى آدم ونوحا وآل إبراهيم وآل محمد على العالمين. Imam Sadiq says this is how the verse was revealed, and this is the narration that my father narrates, and it was taken out of context. Now, what do these narrations mean? That this is how the verse was revealed? That means that there were deletions. That means that there were some that tampered with the Quran and took out verses and words from the Quran. Or some say that the following verse, يا أيها الرسول بلغ ما أنزل إليك في علي من ربك. They say this is how the verse was revealed. في علي. Or وسيعلم الذين ظلموا آل محمد أي منقلب ينقلبون. Some narrations tell us that this is how the verse was revealed. It had آل Muhammad. But today when you pick up the Quran, it doesn't have آل Muhammad. So what do we do about these narrations that say that these verses were omitted? There were words in these verses that were omitted. What do we do about these narrations? The answer, my dear friends, is that we have three answers. The first answer is that we just a couple of minutes ago, we mentioned that revelations are of two kinds. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed to Rasulullah, there's two kinds of revelations. The first revelation is the revelation of the Quran itself. The second revelation is not the Quran, but the tafsir of the Quran, the explanation of the Quran. Thus, the Imam could be saying that the meaning of this verse, يَا أَيُّهَا الرَّسُولُ بَلِّغْ مَا أُنزِلَ إِلَيْكَ فِي عَلِيٍّ, O Rasulullah, deliver the message. Imam Sadiq says that Allah revealed to him the meaning of this verse is that deliver the message regarding Ali ibn Abi Talib. This doesn't mean that the actual verse had the name of Ali ibn Abi Talib. But Allah explained to Rasulullah in a revelation that what I mean by the message is Ali ibn Abi Talib. Do you see? There's a big difference. We have two kinds of revelations. One is the Quran and one is the explanation of the Quran. This is one answer. The second answer is many of these narrations have a weak chain of narrators. Many of them. Many of these narrations that speak of deletions and distortions, they have a weak chain of narrators. Three, we cannot accept these narrations, even if they had a strong chain of narrators. Why? Because we have strong proof that the Quran was not distorted. When you have very, very strong proof, to the point that it gives you certainty that the Quran has not been distorted, if you have narrations that say it is distorted, you have to put them away. You cannot accept these narrations because you have proof going against them. And we do. We have proof that says the Quran has not been distorted. What is this proof? Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Scholars, some, they say that the Quran has not been distorted and has been protected because the Quran itself says Allah has protected the Quran. إِنَّا نَحْنُ نَزَّلْنَا الْقُرْآنَ وَإِنَّا نَحْنُ نَزَّلْنَا الذِّكْرَ. I apologize. إِنَّا نَحْنُ نَزَّلْنَا الذِّكْرَ وَإِنَّا لَهُ لَحَافِظُونَ. We have brought down the book. Al-dhikr means the remembrance, which means the Quran. We have brought down the Quran and we have protected it. وَإِنَّا لَهُ لَحَافِظُونَ. And we are its protectors. Not just once or twice, not just 1,000 years ago, but till the Day of Judgment. Allah says we are the protectors of the Quran. Now, some have argued against this verse. Some say that this does not mean that we have protected it against distortions, but rather we have protected the Quran against attacks, so that no one can attack the Quran. But of course this is wrong, because has the Quran been attacked or no? Of course the Quran has been attacked. So this is not a good argument. Others say yes, Allah says we will protect the Quran. Allah has protected the Quran, and there is a special copy with our Imam, with our hidden Imam. He has a protected copy of the Quran. But as for us, our copies are not protected, and they've been distorted. This is wrong. What good is it if there's one protected copy, and it's with our hidden Imam, and our copies at home that we read and think over and contemplate over and memorize is distorted? Would Allah say, وَإِنَّا لَهُ لَحَافِظُونَ? The book that we're reading, it's distorted. But there's one copy that we won't even reach. And that is the copy that is protected? No, that doesn't make sense. These two arguments are not accepted. However, there is a bigger argument. There is a bigger problem regarding this verse. What is it? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّا نَحْنُ نَزَّلْنَا الذِّكْرَ وَإِنَّا لَهُ لَحَافِظُونَ. That we have revealed the Quran and we have protected it and we shall protect it. We cannot depend on this verse to say that the Quran has not been distorted and tampered with. Why? Why can't we depend on this verse? Because this verse is also under question. This verse is under question. So when you're asked, how do you know that your book is not distorted? Well, the Quran says it's not distorted. But who says that verse hasn't been distorted? You see, you can't tell Christians or Jews or others that my book is protected because my book says so. That doesn't make sense. It's like right now someone comes and says that I'm a very honest person. Well, who said you're an honest person? He says, I said. I say I'm honest. No, that doesn't work. For him to be honest, he either has to prove his honesty, or there's an outside factor that has to come and tell us that this person's honest. I can't tell you I'm honest and expect you to believe me and take it for face value. Well, I have to be honest for you to believe me that I'm honest. Who said that I'm not lying about me being honest? You see? Thus, we cannot accept this verse. There are some people that say, yeah, the Quran says that it's protected and it's not distorted. True! Don't think that I believe the Quran is distorted. The Quran is not distorted. But we can't depend on this verse. That's not an academic way. It's not an academic way to say that the Quran is not distorted because it says so. No. The same thing goes for another verse. لا يأتيه الباطل من بين يديه ولا من خلفه. That no wrong, no falsehood can reach the Quran. لا يأتيه الباطل من بين يديه. Obviously, one of the prime examples of falsehood is what? Distortions. So the Quran is saying no distortions can reach the Quran. But again, you have the same problem. You'll come back to the Quran. How do we know that this verse hasn't been tampered with? Thus, we need an outside factor. We need another proof. We need another evidence to prove to us the Quran. We can't rely on this verse and say that the Quran has been tampered with, even though we believe the Quran has not been tampered with. And the Quran has not been distorted. We have narrations, my dear friends. One of the best ways to prove that the Quran has not been tampered with is Hadith al-Thaqalain. إني تارك فيكم الثقلين كتاب الله وعترتي أهل بيتي ما إن تمسكتم بهما لن تضلوا بعدي أبدا. I leave with you two things, two heavy things. My book, the book of Allah and my family. As long as you hold strongly to both of them, you will not go astray. If Rasulullah knew that this book will be distorted, he wouldn't say this. He wouldn't say this. But because he knew for a fact that the Quran will not be distorted, he says, hold on to the book. You will not go astray. Do you see? We have a hadith that say, think over the Quran. Memorize the Quran. Teach your children the Quran. Plenty of hadith by the Ahlul Bayt. That means that the Quran was not distorted. Because if the Quran was distorted, the Ahlul Bayt would not encourage us to think over the Quran and to contemplate over the Quran and to memorize the Quran and to recite the Quran. Correct? Third, and this is our main proof that the Ahlul Bayt would refer to the Quran. They would tell their companions to refer to the Quran. For example, in business transactions, you could set conditions. Even in marriage, for example, when you marry someone, you could set certain conditions. The Imams said that you can set conditions in transactions, whether it's business or marriage. However, as long as that condition does not contradict the Quran. See, when they say that, when they say as long as that condition does not contradict the Quran, that means that the Quran is not distorted. It's not tampered with. Or the Imams would tell their companions that if you see two narrations that conflict, then what do? See which one of them conforms to the Quran and is compatible to the Quran. That means the Quran is not distorted. If the Quran was distorted, the Ahlul Bayt would not tell their companions to refer to the Quran. Sallu ala Muhammad wa alihi. Finally, if the Quran was distorted, and I conclude with these 2 points. If the Quran was distorted, and there is an original text, where are the other versions of the Quran? If the Quran that we have today is not the original Quran that was revealed upon Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that means there has to be other manuscripts, just like the Bible. Remember in the beginning, we said there's 25,000 manuscripts to the Bible? To the New Testament? To the New Testament, not the Bible. There's 25,000 manuscripts. Where are the other manuscripts of the Quran? Give me another copy of the Quran. But you go across the globe, from China to Indonesia, to Australia, to America, to the UK, to Saudi Arabia, to Iran, to Iraq, all over the world. How many copies of the Quran do you find? Just one. You won't find any other version. Isn't this the biggest proof that the Quran hasn't been tampered with? That the Quran hasn't been distorted? Because if there was a conspiracy and the Quran was distorted, there would definitely be another original copy. There's a distorted copy and there was an original copy. There would be various copies, but where are the copies? Where are the other copies over the Quran? There's no other copies. Even enemies, even the most staunch Sunnis and the most staunch Shias, they still have the same book and they have the same Quran. Those who even sometimes kill each other, but they still have the same Quran with them. They don't have various versions. That, and finally, if the Quran, and this is a very important point, if the Quran was distorted, it would affect the meaning. Wouldn't it affect the meaning? Even if, let's say there were no additions, but there's a possibility of deletions. There's a possibility that some words or verses were deleted. Wouldn't this have an effect on the overall meaning of the Quran? Wouldn't it have an effect on its chapters and verses? But we see that till today the Quran is a masterpiece. It's a perfect piece. Very eloquent. Extremely beautiful. It's perfect. The Quran is perfect. That's the biggest proof that it wasn't tampered with. No one changed the Quran. No one altered the Quran. There was not a single deletion. Why? Because if you take a single word out, it would change the meaning. It would change the eloquence. But we see that till today, The Quran is a masterpiece. The Quran is still eloquent today as ever, as it was 14 centuries ago. Thus, this was a very brief summary. Otherwise, we can continue on about the subject. But I think that this was a brief summary of this topic, and hopefully it did it justice. The past 8 nights, my dear brothers and sisters, were absolutely fabulous. I met some extremely amazing brothers and sisters whose hearts are full of faith, and full of piety, and full of love for Ahlul Bayt. And believe me when I say this, that you've inspired me. Some of you have inspired me in the past couple of nights. You've been very attentive and very respectful. I apologize if I bored you or put some of you to sleep or offended maybe some. That was not my intention. The past 8 nights have been absolutely fabulous for me. May Allah bless you all. Please don't forget me in your du'as and supplications. Remember me in your du'a. Remember my parents, my mother and my father. Remember my children. And I promise that when I go back to Karbala, inshallah, tomorrow, I will remember all of you in my du'a. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. اللهم إني أسألك أن تجعل فيما تقضي وتقدر من الأمر المحتوم في الأمر الحكيم من القضاء الذي لا يرد ولا يبدل أن تكتبنا من حجاج بيتك الحرام المبرور حجهم المشكور سعيهم المغفور ذنوبهم المكفر عنهم سيئاتهم وأن تجعل فيما تقضي وتقدر أن تطيل عمري في خير وعافية وتوسع في رزقي وتجعلني ممن تنتصر به لدينك ولا تستبدل بي غيري. أعوذ بجلال وجهك الكريم أن ينقضي عني شهر رمضان أو يطلع الفجر من ليلتي هذه ولك قبلي تبعة أو ذنب تعذبني عليه ولأرواح المؤمنين والمؤمنات والعلماء والشهداء. نقرأ سورة الفاتحة مع الصلوات.